Mason Hale groaned as his eyes opened. Pain shot through his ribs. Smoke filled the broken cockpit. Sparks jumped from broken wires above his head. The emergency lights blinked red. Ship had crashed. He sat up slowly. His shoulder hurt. His suit was torn. Mason looked around and saw green vines growing into the ship. Outside the shattered window, a dense jungle moved in the wind. He was not on Earth anymore. He was not even near the human colonies. He had landed crashed in an unknown moon. Saravani, he whispered. That's what the nav system called it. Grabbed his emergency kit, a small bag with medical spray, a solar charger, and a beacon. He tapped the beacon. A red light blinked. Good, at least he could call for help. Or weeks. Maybe longer. This part of space was quiet, far from regular travel lanes. Mason climbed out of the broken ship. The heat hit him at once, wet and heavy. The jungle buzzed with strange sounds. Insects clicked. Leaves rustled. Somewhere in the distance, something howled. I need shelter, he muttered. He limped through thick trees, pushing aside wide leaves that shimmered with blue dew. Hours passed. His legs were weak, his lips dry. Just as the sun began to set, two suns, actually, he saw it. A small hut made of crystal and wood stood on a flat rock. It looked old, but clean. The walls shimmered like glass, in strange glowing. Symbols ran across the doorframe. Cautiously. Mason stepped closer. Hello? He called out. The door opened. A girl stood in the doorway. She had silver skin that shimmered in the fading light. Her hair was like soft vines, glowing, faintly purple. Her eyes were big and golden. She wore light clothes made of leaf-like fabric. She looked young but strong. She stared at him for a long second. Then she spoke, voice soft and unsure. Human. Mason blinked. Yeah? Mason, I crashed. She stepped aside and pointed to the inside of the hut. Come, rain soon. He hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Inside, the hut was simple. A soft light came from glowing stones in the ceiling. There was a round table, a few carved shelves, and one bed, just one. The bed was made of plant fibers and looked comfortable. I didn't know anyone lived here, Mason said, sitting down carefully. She tilted her head. I live. Name is Zyra. Nice to meet you, Zyra, Mason replied. He winced as he pressed the medical spray to his ribs. She watched closely. You are hurt. Yeah, but I'll be okay. Zyra looked at the storm clouds outside. Rain began to fall, tapping the crystal walls. Then came the thunder. You stay, she said. Not safe outside. He nodded. Thanks, just for the night. She moved to a small pot and poured something warm into a wooden cup. She handed it to him. Drink heal herb. Mason took a sip. It tasted strange sweet and bitter but warm and comforting. His eyes felt heavy. He hadn't slept in almost a day. Zyra sat on the floor and stared at the firestone in the center of the room. It gave off heat without flame. Do you live? Here alone? Mason asked. She nodded. Yes, others far away. I like quiet. There was silence for a while. Mason leaned back. His body relaxed. The bed behind him was the only soft spot in the hut. Zyra stood and pointed to it. Only one bed, she said calmly. You sleep? I also? Mason sat up a little, surprised. Oh, you don't have to. I can sleep on the floor. Zyra frowned. Floor cold. You are a guest. He didn't argue. He was too tired. He lay back down, careful of his ribs. The bed was warm, soft. He closed his eyes. A moment later, he felt the bed move. Zyra lay beside him, facing the other way. Her glowing hair touched his arm. Her talus, she had a small one curled near his leg. It was quiet. The rain whispered outside. Mason opened one eye. Zyra HM. Thanks for letting me stay, she smiled faintly. Human warm. Good guest. Then she curled up smaller, breathing slow. Mason closed his eyes again. Despite the crash, the jungle, the pain, He felt safe. Mason woke slowly. The soft sound of birds echoed outside. Light came through the crystal walls. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he felt it. Warmth against his side. Sarah, she was still curled beside him. Her glowing purple hair brushed against his arm. Her breathing was soft and calm. He didn't move. He didn't want to disturb her. Last night came back in pieces. His crash, the jungle, her strange hut, and finally, her quiet voice saying, "Only one bed." He smiled a little to himself. After a few minutes, Zyra stretched and sat up. Her golden eyes blinked at him. "You are alive," she said with a small grin. "Barely." Mason said with a chuckle, rubbing his ribs. "But I slept better than I expected." Zyra stood and opened a small wooden box. Inside were fruits and green leaves. "You eat this," she said, handing him a strange round fruit. "It heal inside." Mason bit into it, sweet and juicy. He nodded. "Good." Zyra watched him closely. "You need to walk, move body. If you stay still, you get worse." "I don't know if I can," Mason said. "I feel like a bruised potato." She pulled him gently to his feet. "You are soft," she teased, "but I help." Mason laughed. "Thanks." They stepped out into the jungle. The air was fresh, and the storm had passed. The leaves sparkled with water. The ground was muddy but firm. Zyra moved easily, like she belonged here. Her steps were quiet. She pointed out glowing flowers, strange bug nests, and tall trees with wide, flat leaves that one hides water, she said, tapping a tree. "Good for drink." Mason tried to keep up. "How long have you lived here?" "Many seasons. I was small when I came. Now I am grown." "Why live alone?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My people, Valari, do not like outsiders. I was curious, so I left." Mason nodded. "I get that. Curiosity is how humans ended up flying through space, too." Zyra tilted her head. "Humans explore much." "All the time," Mason said proudly. "We send ships to new planets. We study stars. We meet new species." Zyra smiled softly. "You are brave. Or foolish. Maybe both." They reached a small stream with bright blue water. Zyra knelt beside it and cupped her hands. "Drink here. Clean." Mason sat on a rock. His body still ached, but walking it helped. He watched Zyra as she moved gracefully, always aware of her surroundings. "Your people," he said. "Do they all look like you?" She nodded. "Silver skin, golden eyes. Hair changes with mood. Mine is calm now." Mason looked at her glowing hair. "What does it look like when you're angry?" Zyra grinned. "Red, very red," he laughed. "I'll try not to make you angry." They walked deeper into the forest. Zyra showed him plants that could be used as bandages. She showed him a tree that grew edible seeds. She even pointed to a tall stone with ancient markings. "Valari writing," she explained, "tells stories, warnings." Mason traced the symbols. "I wish I could read this." She touched his hand lightly. "I can teach, if you stay." I looked at her. There was something gentle in her voice, something hopeful. "Maybe I will," he said quietly, as the sun rose higher. They reached a hill with a clear view of the jungle below. In the distance, smoke still rose from his crashed ship. "I need to go back," Mason said. "My gear, my beacon." Zyra frowned. "Danger. Big beasts come near wrecks. They smell fire." "I'll be careful," he said. "I go with you." They turned back and made their way toward the crash site. Along the way, Zyra stopped at a small cave. "In here," she said, "safe path underground. Less smell. Beasts cannot follow." Mason followed her inside. The cave glowed faintly with moss. It was narrow but dry. As they walked through the tunnel, Mason asked, "How do you know so much about this place?" She answered softly, "I listen. I watch. The forest speaks if you are quiet. You're like a jungle scout." She smiled. Scout and protector. At the end of the tunnel, they came out near the crash. The ship was still there, bent, broken, smoking but intact. Mason quickly gathered what he could. a second beacon, a datapad, and a solar-powered tool. He also found his small picture of Earth, a photo of his parents and his dog. He smiled, holding it close. Suddenly, Zyra froze. "Something is near," she whispered. They ducked behind a fallen wing. From the trees, a tall beast stepped out. It had thick gray fur, 6 legs, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Mason held his breath. The beast sniffed the air, growled, then walked around the ship. It sniffed closer. Zyra touched Mason's hand. "Stay still." The beast turned and slowly walked away, disappearing into the trees. Mason exhaled. "That was close," Zyra nodded. "Next time, not so lucky. We go now." They returned to the hut by sunset. Tired, hungry, but safe. Inside, Zyra lit the firestone. She handed him a fruit and some cooked roots. As they sat, she said, "You are not like other humans." "How so?" "You listen, you learn. You don't try to take or break things." "I just crashed," Mason said with a shrug. "Didn't come here to take anything. That's why I trust you." Later, as they prepared for sleep, Mason looked at the bed. He hesitated. Zyra noticed and gave a small laugh. "Still one bed," she said, "and I still curl up." He smiled and lay down. She joined him again, close and calm, as the stars blinked above and the forest sang outside. Mason whispered Zyra. "Yes, I think I like this place." She whispered back, "And I think I like you." Then she closed her eyes and curled up beside him, tail gently touching his leg once more. The jungle had never felt more alive or more dangerous. Mason and Zyra moved quickly but quietly through the thick underbrush. The weight of the day's sun had faded, replaced by the cool shadows of the alien moon's twin moons rising in. The sky Mason still felt the pain in his ribs, but it was nothing compared to the fear in his gut. They were not alone. Zyra glanced back, her golden eyes sharp and alert. Something is coming. Bad things. Mason gripped his small plasma cutter tightly. He had fixed it himself from the wreckage. "Who, what?" "Dravik Syndicate," Zyra said quietly. "Hunters. Mercenaries. They want your ship, your tech. They kill for it." Mason's heart pounded. The Dravik Syndicate were infamous in this sector, ruthless warriors and pirates who took whatever they wanted. If they found his ship and the emergency beacon, they would come in force. "We have to move," Mason said. "We can't fight." Them Hedon Zyra nodded and led him deeper into the jungle. She knew every path, every hidden corner of the forest. Mason struggled to keep up, but Zyra was like a shadow. Swift, silent, and sure. After an hour, they reached a small clearing. Zyra stopped, looking at the thick vines hanging from the trees. "Here," she said, "Old Valari Temple. My ancestors built it. We hide there when danger comes." Mason looked at the ruins. Giant stone pillars covered in glowing runes. The air buzzed with strange energy. "Looks like a good place to hide," Mason said, still breathing hard. Zyra took his hand. "Come." They entered the temple slowly. Inside, the air was cooler, and the walls glowed faintly. Strange crystals hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow light across the floor. Zyra moved to one of the pillars and pressed her hand against it. The runes lit brighter. "Power here. Protect us." Mason nodded. "Can it keep out the mercenaries?" Zyra smiled faintly. "It can slow them, but we must be smart." They settled in a small room lined with soft moss. Mason set his plasma cutter on the ground. He pulled out his datapad and checked the signal from his beacon. "It's still working," he said, "but it's sending strong signals. They will find me soon." Zyra looked worried. "We prepare. We fight." Suddenly, distant noises echoed through the temple, heavy footsteps and low voices. Mason's eyes widened. "They're coming," he whispered. Zyra grabbed his arm. "Stay calm." The mercenaries moved closer. Mason heard their harsh voices. "Outside. Find the human tech. The Dravik Syndicate pays well for that gear." Mason swallowed. He could feel the fear creeping in. But he looked at Zira, calm, brave, ready. "We fight together," she said. "Trust me."
Nice.
He tested the plasma cutter in his hand, hummed softly. The mercenaries stormed into the temple, big armored figures with heavy weapons. Their eyes scanned the glowing walls. Zyra moved first. She darted forward faster than Mason expected. With a quick strike, she knocked one mercenary to the ground. Mason fired his plasma cutter, sending a bright blue beam that cut through metal. Armor. The battle was fierce. Mason and Zyra fought side by side. Mason's skills as an engineer helped him find weak spots in the mercenaries' weapons and armor. Zyra's speed and agility made her almost impossible to hit. One mercenary grabbed Mason from behind. Mason struggled, but Zyra was there. She bit the mercenary's arm hard, forcing him to release Mason. "Run," Zyra shouted. They ducked into a narrow corridor. Mason's ribs burned from the effort, but adrenaline pushed him forward. At the end of the corridor was a heavy stone door covered with runes. Zyra pressed her hand again. The door sealed shut with a deep rumble. The mercenaries pounded on the door, shouting curses. Mason leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Zyra sat beside him, eyes glowing faintly. "They will break through." "Soon," she said. "We need a plan." Mason thought fast. "There's energy in this temple, those crystals. Maybe I can use them." Zyra looked curious. How Mason pulled out his datapad and began tapping rapidly. "If I can connect my plasma cutter to the crystals, maybe I can make a big pulse enough to stop them for a while." Zyra nodded. "Do it." Mason worked quickly, attaching wires from his cutter to the glowing crystals on the wall. Energy crackled and hummed. Suddenly, the temple shook. The mercenaries' pounding grew louder. Mason took a deep breath and pressed the trigger. A bright pulse of light exploded from the crystals. It washed over the temple entrance and into the jungle. Outside, the mercenaries froze, stunned by the blast. Some dropped their weapons. The pulse scrambled their tech. Zyra smiled. It worked. Mason wiped sweat from his brow. Not for long. But enough. They heard footsteps retreating. The mercenaries were pulling back for now. Mason sank to the floor. His body was spent. Zyra knelt beside him. "You are brave," she said softly. "I'm lucky you're here." Zyra smiled and reached out, placing her hand gently over his heart. "You feel warm? Different?" Mason looked into her eyes and felt something strange, a calm he hadn't known in a long time. "Thanks for saving me." Zyra's tail curled. Around his leg, "We save each other." The temple grew quiet. Outside, the jungle breathed under the twin moons. Mason knew this was just the beginning. The moonlight filtered softly through the broken pillars of the Valari temple. Mason and Zyra sat close to the glowing crystals, catching their breath after the fight. But the danger was far from over. Outside, the jungle was alive with the sounds of movement. The Dravik Syndicate was coming back. Mason looked at Zyra, her golden eyes bright with determination. "We can't hide forever," Mason said, his voice low. "They'll come with more men." Zyra nodded. "We stand together." Mason swallowed his fear. He wasn't a soldier, he was an engineer. But if he was going to survive, he had to fight. And not just fight, he had to fight with Zyra. They began to prepare. Mason pulled out the tools he had salvaged from the wreckage wires. Energy cells, a small fusion battery. He looked at the crystals around them, glowing softly with ancient energy. "If I can connect this power to the temple's defense system, maybe we can protect the whole area," he said. Zyra watched him carefully. "You do this?" "Try, but I need time." Zyra smiled faintly. "Then I guard." As Mason worked, Zyra moved silently around the temple ruins. She checked the hidden paths, set small traps made of vines and sharp stones, and marked safe routes. Her knowledge of the jungle was unmatched. Mason focused on his work. His fingers moved quickly, connecting wires to the glowing crystals, rerouting power through the temple's energy network. His mind raced with calculations, adjusting energy flow and testing circuits. Hours passed. Finally, Mason stood up, holding a small control device. This should let us trigger a defense pulse when the mercenaries attack. Zyra nodded. Good, but they come soon. Mason gripped his plasma cutter. Then we get ready. The jungle grew quiet. Suddenly shadows moved between the trees. Dozens of mercenaries appeared, heavily armed and shouting orders. Mason felt his heart race. But Zyra was calm. She whispered, "Stay close." The mercenaries charged. Zyra sprang forward, faster than any human could move. She dodged blaster fire and slashed with sharp claws hidden beneath her gloves. Mason fired his plasma cutter beams. A blue light cutting through the air. The battle was fierce. Mason ducked behind a broken pillar as shots flew overhead. One mercenary aimed directly at him. Mason held his breath as the blast passed inches from his face. Zyra tackled another mercenary. Knocking him to the ground, she growled softly. A sound Mason had never heard before, fierce and protective. Mason's ribs screamed in pain, but he pushed through it. He spotted the mercenary leader, a tall figure with a helmet and glowing red eyes. The leader raised a powerful weapon, aiming at Zyra. "Zyra!" Mason shouted. In that moment, Mason triggered the control device. The temple's crystals blazed with light. A pulse of energy shot outward, hitting the mercenaries like a wave. Some mercenaries screamed as their weapons short-circuited. Others were thrown back by the force. The leader staggered, but didn't fall. Mason and Zyra charged together. Zyra's claws slashed the leader's armor. Mason fired his plasma cutter, weakening the weapon. With a final strike, Zyra knocked the leader to the ground. The remaining mercenaries fled, shouting curses. The temple grew quiet again. Mason sank to his knees, breathing hard. Zyra knelt beside him. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "You are strong," she said softly. "I am lucky," Mason replied. "Lucky to fight with you." Zyra smiled, her glowing hair flickering gently. That night, Mason's pain was worse. But the victory filled him with new strength. They returned to the small hut. Zyra lit the firestone. Mason sat on the bed, careful with his ribs. Zyra curled up beside him, her tail brushing his leg. "You are not alone," she whispered. Mason looked at her, feeling warmth in the cold jungle night. "Not anymore," he said softly. They slept. Close, ready for whatever the jungle and the stars would bring next. The jungle was quiet. The sun was just starting to rise, casting soft light through the tall trees. Mason woke slowly, feeling the cool air on his skin. The pain in his ribs was still there, but it was less sharp than before. He looked to the side. Zyra was still curled up beside him, her golden eyes closed. He smiled gently. Outside the hut, strange sound filled the air, a low hum, growing louder. Mason's heart jumped, sat up quickly, careful not to hurt himself. "Zyra," he said softly. "Listen." She opened her eyes, sitting up too. The hum grew louder. Then the sky above the jungle lit up with bright beams of light. A large ship descended through the trees. It was a human rescue ship from Mason's crew. Mason stood and stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the bright lights. The rescue team was here. Zyra followed him quietly. A small landing platform opened on the ship. Soldiers and medics rushed down to the jungle floor. They called Mason's name. Mason waved. "I'm here." The medics ran to him, checking his wounds. "You're lucky to be alive," she said. Mason nodded. "Thanks to Zyra." "Yeah." Manek looked confused but didn't ask questions. Mason looked at Zyra, who stood silently behind him. The team started to load Mason's gear onto the ship. Mason turned to Zyra. "I want you to come with me," he said. "There's a place for you on the ship." Zyra hesitated. She looked at the jungle, then back at Mason. "I don't know your world. You don't have to. I'll show you." Captain of the rescue ship approached. He looked at Zyra with surprise but said nothing. Mason smiled at Zyra. "Come on, it's time." Slowly, Zyra stepped onto the ship. Inside, the air was different, cleaner and cooler. Mason showed Zyra the controls, the lights, the strange machines. She looked around in wonder. Mason guided her to a small room. It had one bed, soft and warm. Zaira smiled and said softly, "Still one bed?" Mason laughed. "Still one bed." That night, Zaira curled up next to Mason again. He held her hand. The room was filled with soft light from the stars outside the window. Over the next days, the rescue ship took Mason back to the human space station. Zaira stayed by his side, learning quickly about this new world. They faced questions and curious stares, but Mason stood proud. "This is Zaira," he told everyone. "My friend, my protector." Zaira smiled shyly. She was no longer just a jungle alien, she was part of Mason's life. One evening, as the ship sailed through the stars, Mason looked at Zaira. "Do you miss the jungle?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. But you're safe here, Mason," said she, smiled and whispered, "With you, I am home." Mason felt a warmth inside his chest. He knew this was the start of something new, a story of two worlds joined by trust and friendship. And somewhere, deep in the stars, he was no longer alone.